Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Name a thing from your childhood that feels mysterious and unexplained in retrospect. As far back as I can remember, I had a memory of what I thought was a dream. It was so weird, I assumed that's what it was for years. Just a dream. I remember everything from the perspective of a boy. I was on that weird Star Wars ride at Disney World from the 80s. Star Tours. I remember saying some shit and talking to these adults sitting next to me in our seats in the front row. It was so real, but I didn't know these people's faces or anything. So I chalked it up to being dumb and moved on. Until years later, I went to Disney World with my cousins. I was a teenager at this point, and years had passed since the dream. That's when it happened. I was sitting in the back row when I saw a family being seated in the front row. I recognized these people from the dream. That's when I saw a little boy following them. He sat next to them in the same seat I was in the dream. He turned to them and said, verbatim, all the things I said in the dream. Even the adults' reactions to him were exactly like I remembered. It was really freaking me out. I've been thinking about it for decades now. Somehow I think I had that boy's memory of that day, presumably before he was born, judging by his age at the time. I have zero explanation for this, but I saw that event through his eyes years before it happened.
There are a couple of incidents from when I was young. Once we had just moved to a new location and I was sick, probably just cold, but my fever was high, so my parents took me to a local doctor. He gave me a few medicines. They were very strong, very. My body temperature went from 102 to 95 or something in an hour. My hands started shaking, and for like a decade after that, my hands would always shake. This medicine also made my pee green. But the scariest thing was the dreams. When I slept after taking this medicine, in my sleep I felt something large yet small. It's like touching something that is too dense. Like if you've ever held gold, it's very heavy for its size. But multiply that dissonance by 1,000 or more. I don't know how to describe it, but I would feel that, and the next moment, I'd wake up to find like 10 hours had gone by. My parents would think I slept well, because I would look peaceful, but I'd always wake up crying. We never went to that doctor again. Another was that my house has 3 doors, one in the front, one at the back that goes in the lawn, and one from the kitchen. That day, I was in the room that opens to the back lawn. My mom was in the lawn doing something, and then she went into the kitchen to take something. Then, she went back from the lawn to the kitchen. I had asked something like, "Did you go out from the kitchen door?" But she said she was in the lawn the whole time. She got worried that someone had broken in, but we found no one. She concluded I must have confused the curtains on the other side of the room for her walking. I don't know how I'd confuse that, but that happened.
I had a similar thing happen when I was young. I don't think I was sick. I would fall asleep and dream of rain or snow flurries. These little flurries would hit me, but they felt very dense. Maybe not dense, but heavier than they should be. The snow flurries would be pelting me, but it would feel more like tennis balls hitting me. For some reason, I feel like it was tied to my sinuses. During my dream, it was like I could feel my congestion. Very weird feeling, but after it never happened again.
Do you have any liver issues? There's a condition called Reyes syndrome where the majority of cases in children are because they were given aspirin. Children's livers can't process aspirin like adults can, so it ends up damaging the liver, eventually affecting the brain. A hand-flapping tremor is associated with liver diseases, since the liver can't metabolize ammonia, so the ammonia builds up and affects the brain. Green pea is also a sign of liver disease, because of bilirubin leaking into your urine. Maybe that's what you experienced, maybe a mild form of it. It's pretty well known not to give aspirin to kids. Maybe it wasn't well known back then. Maybe he was just a shitty doctor. Maybe it was some med that had salicylates in it and he didn't know. Maybe you were teens or preteens and he thought you were old enough to take it. But Reyes is serious. If that's the case, you could have died, or been left with more serious brain damage and destroyed liver.
I spoke with a devil. It appeared as the traditional red thing. It did no harm, never touched me, but it would speak to me. It looked evil. It had violent eyes and a perpetual smile. It spoke to me, a 4-year-old human, about metaphysical matters in a way that was sort of understandable to a child. I was quite terrified of it and never enjoyed being in my room with that thing. It always appeared to me in my bedroom and stood in the same spot. It would gradually appear and then gradually fade away. This could happen during the day or night, but only if I was by myself. It told me about heaven and hell, about other places too, that I had the ability to break things and it was interested in me being here. Those statements were never elaborated on by the devil. It never seemed to tempt me, but just try to talk to me about if I knew about X or Y, etc. It asked me questions that I didn't know the answer to, like if I knew the law of the black star, rules of the one, or the never-ending threshold. When I told it that I didn't know, it would laugh at me. It seemed to have gotten a kick out of the fact that I didn't know whatever it was asking me about. I felt stupid for not knowing. Sadly, I have forgotten some of the topics it discussed with me in detail. I also remember it telling me when I was about a year older that I was growing up and it would be much more difficult to remain in contact with me, and it hoped I would break a few things while here. I was glad it left, but confused to this day why I had these probable psychotic moments as a kid. I'm pretty sure this was an overactive imagination, but I did grow up in a haunted house, so who knows?
That's creepy as hell. But I've heard of other beings saying it would get harder to stay in contact as the child got older. Coincidentally, past lives become much more difficult to remember, and the age window to ask a child if they remember their past life closes around 5 years old. It's like the veil is thinner in childhood or something.
I live in Brazil, and during my childhood, I used to visit a beach house that my family owned with my cousins. We would often ride bikes around the neighborhood. The streets were made of sand and earth, and followed small streams, and their sides were lined with bushes and trees. One day, while biking near one of these streams, I looked to my left and spotted something resembling a blue ball, though it was really blurry. It appeared to have a blue crab pincer, and what my Super Mario addicted self identified as a raccoon tail. The thing jumped up and down slowly, and no matter how much I focused on it, it remained blurry. So I dropped my bike and ran to fetch my older cousin, asking him to come see the creature I had found. By the time we returned, it had vanished, of course. Never again did I see something like that, or had any other supernatural experience, in fact. Always tell these stories to others, even though it's not that scary.
Waking up at 3 in the morning and looking out my window and seeing a beautiful woman in white, that most definitely wasn't my neighbor, run out of my neighbor's garden and run across the street. The house across the street was under construction, and she just walked up to the fence and started shaking and rattling it. She seemed stressed out and panicked about something. I wanted to go out and talk to her, and I had this deep feeling that if I went out to talk with her, I would be taken on the adventure of a lifetime. I chose not to, and I went back to sleep. Still kind of regret not trying to talk with her that night.
I grew up in the rural South next to a railroad track. One night my family gets home from shopping at like 9 or 10-ish. It's a full moon, so I thought, screw it, let's play outside some. For some reason, get the impulse to see where the railroad tracks are. I start almost mindlessly walking down the tracks for what feels like 30 minutes to an hour, come to an old beat-up wooden train station. There are a couple of old geezer hicks sitting on the platform talking. When they notice me, they all start shooing me away, telling me to turn back and go back home. I decided that I probably should make sure my parents don't get on to me. I finally got back to my house, resigned to getting chewed out by my parents since I had been gone for hours. They're still carrying in bags to the house. It hasn't been 3 minutes since I ran off. They didn't even realize I was gone, and since I didn't get in trouble, I didn't push the issue.
Be me 5 years old. At preschool, we go for a walk, 14 or so kids, to an orchard to pick apples so lunch lady can make dessert. It's the countryside, so literally go over a highway, and you're there. Everyone holding hands. Teachers wait for vehicles to pass so kids can cross. I decided I am going to be first to cross. Winner.png. See only a bus, but it's kind of far, and decide to run. As I'm almost to the other side, I look right. Bus is literally inches from me. The first-person view turns to the third person for like a second. My first out-of-body experience? See myself run and almost get hit by the bus. The view goes back to the first person to me, celebrating my epic win on the other side of the road. Teachers and kids are in the middle of the highway walking towards me. Get yelled at for running away from the group. Later, my parents came to pick me up at preschool. Tell parents about the bus. Parents panic and ask teachers. There was no bus.exe. Did I die? I was adamant that there was a bus. I wouldn't shut up like how epic it was. No other kid saw the bus either, so I got dismissed as just being a stupid kid. I don't know.
Okay, I have 2 stories I can remember right now which were off. The first one, I was maybe 5 or 7, can't remember clearly, and sleeping in my bed when I had this ultra-vivid dream. Like, I can still feel it in a way. I was running with someone in the woods at night. It felt like wolves were behind us, but it wasn't wolves. I don't know how I know, but I just did or do. Suddenly, the person I was with tripped over a branch and fell. I stopped for a second and the person screamed, "Run, don't help me." But I just couldn't. I stopped, tried to help him or her up. I can't remember the person, when suddenly something jumped out of the dark behind us and I was in my bed, completely drenched in sweat with a feeling of never-matched doom. I ran to my grandma's bed. Sad family story, was raised by grandma, and cried and slept there for the night. I don't even know if I can remember something before that dessous. It's just really weird. The second one, it was 3 or 4 years ago. I was sleeping in my bed when suddenly the biggest bang I ever heard woke me up. It was like I was shell-shocked. I just sat in my bed for 10 seconds before panicking and running to my grandma because I feared she would be injured too. It was 9 p.m. When I got to her, still shell-shocked mind you, she looked at me completely normal, didn't even realize in what state I was, and when I asked her if she heard the bang, she said, "No, why?" I was completely in disbelief, but maybe it was just a firecracker thrown at my window. IDK how she didn't hear it, but yeah. Feel free to ask anything. I try to answer everything.
I could never understand where my 3rd year went in primary school. It's like it didn't happen. I can remember the 1st year perfectly well and the 2nd and all the rest, but even back then I remember thinking, what the hell happened to primary 3? I can't remember the teacher or anything I must have learned during that year also. When I was a kid, I used to go walking along a fairly long road to go meet up with neighbor kids or go to the rope swing. And I remember thinking something along the lines of, I'm always going to remember standing here as I stood in the middle of the road, staring off up the length of it. I imagined my future self looking at myself, as I was in that moment, standing staring up the road. I've never forgotten it and can picture myself stood there as I imagined it at that exact moment, vaguely transparent. Like a ghost, I stood there for quite a while, thinking of the future and telling myself to remember the moment. I stood there for long enough to freak myself out a bit before I left, turning to look at my imagined self occasionally as I walked further and further away ever since then. Each time I walked that road, I remembered doing that, and imagined myself as I was back then, staring off up the road thinking about what it'll be like in the future, and if I'd remember standing there and to picture myself as I was while I committed the scene and the idea to memory.
There was this one time when I was 11 or 12. We were on a multi-day school trip, and we were all standing in a town square in the evening. Presumably the teachers were making hotel arrangements. I don't remember exactly where they were. 2 guys approach us and start talking to our group. They had 2 animal masks and a camera with them. One was a fox mask, the other one I can't remember. Maybe a dog or a cat or rabbit. But they were very high-quality masks with punched hairs, whiskers, really high quality. They were not cartoonish, they were realistic animal masks. So they ask if any of us wants to take pictures with the masks. And I'm like, sure, no problem. I'm incredibly naive, I guess. Anyways, first we take some pictures in the square, and then we take some pictures further away from my classmates. When we're almost out of sight and out of the town square, a classmate who was less dumb than me came and made sure to get me back to the group. And that's the story. Probably owe my life to him paying attention.
I remember my mom deciding that she thought I was having seizures in my sleep without being aware of it, so she wanted to get me tested for it. So I had to stay up all night the night before I was going to get tested. So I would sleep during the sleep study they were doing. I remember getting out of school and going to the hospital. They put little wires on my head, attached by little glue balls, and I went to sleep. For some reason, I think my dad was with me, even though they got divorced. I woke up and either went back to school or back home. I can't remember, but I do specifically remember pulling out those little glue balls from my hair over the next few days. I mentioned this to my mom, and she said it never happened, and was very concerned about why I thought it did happen. She said there was a time when she thought my brother was having seizures, but never me. I'm not sure if she said my brother got tested or not. It's been a while since I've brought this up to her. I promise I'm not schizo or anything. I'm a fairly normal member of society.
When I was a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, I was playing with my older brother one afternoon at Grandma's house. We were chasing each other on this hallway with Grandmother's room on one side, where she was watching her soap operas, and one room at the end of it. Anyway, afternoon becomes night, and all the lights in the house were off. The only light that illuminated the hallway came from my grandmother's room. I remember I was running from the living room to the hallway when suddenly I didn't see my brother anymore. I see the dark room at the end with its door opened, and I think my brother is hiding from me, trying to scare me. I come near that room calling for him, but no one answers. I enter and say something like, "Oh, come on now, I know you're trying to scare me. Stop it." It was dark and I couldn't see anything, but I swear to God I heard someone making a breath sound right in front of me. Sort of like a parcel or someone who imitates the sound of a snake. I tried to make out who it was, and all I could see was the silhouette of someone at the back of the room sticking out his tongue while making the sound. I noped out of there back to my grandma's room. Mind you, up until this point, I still thought it was my brother. What's weird is when I entered the room, he was sitting in bed watching TV with Grandma. I wasn't scared, but I was very confused. Sometime later, I asked my brother about it, and he seemed genuinely concerned.
This is going to be a weird one to explain. When I was around 13, I experienced a sort of time stop. I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, and my mother was vacuuming in front of me. My father, my uncle, and my grandfather were sitting in the dining room talking. I was focusing on the TV when all of a sudden the TV froze. I looked at my mother and she stood frozen, with vacuum in hand. The noise from the kitchen had stopped, so I went to go see what was going on. I saw my father, uncle, and grandfather all sitting frozen as well, as if mid-conversation. I raced back into the living room to see my mother, and everything had unfrozen. My mother was vacuuming as before and the TV went back to normal. I was so confused as to what happened. I went back into the kitchen and asked my father if he saw me come into the kitchen earlier, and of course he said he didn't. That was the strangest thing I have ever experienced in my life, and I have no explanation to it. Nothing like this has ever happened since, although I have had other strange experiences, which I feel I probably could explain. I sometimes wonder if anyone has ever had something like this happen to them.
I was about 16, so not exactly a kid, but not an adult either. Summer day was boring, so I decided to go to the nearby park to do some fishing and just get out of the house. I got to the park and headed to the back of it where the good fishing pond was. While on the trail, I noticed a small dried-up creek bed to my left and a dead goose laying there. Now, geese were a big problem in our small suburb, but I'd never seen one just laying dead. Followed the creek bed a little more out of curiosity, and it opened up to a larger portion, and littered all over the creek bed were dead geese. Everywhere. At least 30 to 40 geese were laid out in that opening. No smell of decay, no loose feathers everywhere, not even blood. It took me probably a good 30 seconds to realize what I was looking at, and when I snapped to reality, I quickly gathered my things and jogged home. I'm sure there's a logical explanation to it, but I just can't think of one. Maybe they were poisoned by something in the park? Who knows?
I used to have a recurring dream where I'd go into my grandma's laundry room downstairs and meet a vampire. He'd chat with me but was scary. I would always run past the room because the TV room was past it, and it was scary to me. 6-ish. In Before Side Quest, this is also interesting. As an adult, I was chatting with my mum, and she was telling me about a recurring dream she had of an evil place. And then, while looking for a house to buy, she found the perfect house. But when she went into the basement, it had that distinct room, and she noped out of there. After hearing that story, I told her about the laundry room at Grandma's, and she got a little weird and said there was definitely something down there. Apparently, the family often heard voices and things moving in that room. They would also hear footsteps upstairs when nobody else was there. She also told me that while the family went on a trip, someone broke into the house. The back door had been kicked in. They had gone through the whole place, grabbed lots of valuables, but all of them were found on the floor in the laundry room, like the thief just dropped them and left. After my grandma passed away, another member of the family lived in the house. I never visited her there, but she said there was never anything happening, no ghosts, which semi-leads into the next bit. Around 13 years old, my mom started thinking I was places when I wasn't. It still happens to this day. She constantly sees me, hears me, notices my shadow, etc. Then I'd come from where I actually was and she'd get confused. It's probably happened hundreds of times. There's like a ghost of me doing stuff. When I was 14, my best friend's mom banned me from interacting with the family. In the last few times I visited the house, she would sage and do stuff when I was over. I called her and begged her for a reason, and she told me that I was surrounded by evil spirits and that she needed to protect her family from me.
So, you remember Shadow from Bear and the Big Blue House? Basically this character that you would have to summon by chanting her little theme song. Where, oh where is Shadow? Where, oh where is Shadow? Where, oh where is Shadow? Where could Shadow be? Pretty sure it was sung to some pre-existing tune. Anyway, one time, her segment came on and I did the chant. But instead of just appearing in the TV, she appeared on a wall in my house like 2 rooms away. I had a clear view there. She was like 3 times as big as she was in the show, but otherwise basically the same. She did the little here I am thing, then vanished. Freaked me the duck out. After that, I became terrified of the Shadow song, because I thought it would happen again. My mom would sometimes scare me into doing stuff by threatening to summon Shadow with the song.
Disembodied, loud breathing noise suddenly made itself heard in my cousin's room sometimes in the afternoon when I was over at his place. Tried to locate the origin, to no avail. It just hung in the middle of the room. Eventually it went away. Since it was daytime we were puzzled, but ultimately not scared. Couple of nights later, I hear the same respiration noise hovering over my bed at night randomly. Some nights it was there, others it wasn't. Sometimes it would be around at daytime too. Never found out what it was. Probably a demon though, since it fucked off and never came back when I grew tired of it one evening and yelled at it to GTFO.
No LARP, but I had this exact experience when I was younger. Sounded like someone breathing slowly, but heavily through their nose. It was mostly at night, so I thought what I was hearing was my parents sleeping in the next room. My dad was a very loud snorer and sleeper generally. But sometimes I could actually hear my dad snoring, but also hear this nose breathing so loud it sounded like it was in my room for sure. Sometimes it would last for what felt like an hour. I was too frightened to investigate, so I never found out what it was. I would just lie there listening to it and trying to make sense of it until I fell asleep from exhaustion.
OP from that post here. Yeah, trust me. My cousin and I went from room to room trying to investigate where the noise came from. Birds, heater pipes, both can make noises that sound like some heavy breathing, etc. were all ruled out since it didn't come from the floor or ceiling or outside the house, but smack dab from mid-air in his room. The only reason we weren't scared was because it was like 3 p.m. and bright outside and inside. We were just puzzled. I was a little more spooked when it apparently followed me home and started being around at night. I was only not terrified because it introduced itself during daytime, so it was more of a LOL WTF is that type of reaction versus I am utterly terrified by this respiration noise that my brain fails to explain through any other means, but it's got to be something paranormal. I also had some wild sleep paralysis during the period of time where the respiration noise tended to hang out in my room. Maybe connected, dunno. Kinda glad to have slammed the door into the face of whatever it was, not interested in dealing with spooks and their BS.
I'm almost certain it happened to me during the day as well, but similar to you and your cousin, I wasn't as bothered because it wasn't at night. I remember having the thought that it was me being able to hear myself breathing loudly, so I held my breath for as long as I could. But it just meant that I could hear the other breathing more clearly, which freaked me out even more. So weird, man. I don't know when or why it stopped, but it must have because I forgot about it until I read your post and it all came flooding back.
Around the time my cousin and I were very interested in the occult because we were bored kids in the countryside, and it just happened to be the span of years where horror flicks like The Craft and also The Ring, The Grudge, and so forth had come out. I'm pretty sure whatever it was, my cousin and I attracted it by wanting to meddle with the paranormal. That quickly stopped when things got weird, like with that breathing noise. It's funny you mention holding your breath, because that is what my cousin and I did after we looked up from our comics when we heard the noise for the first time going, "Is that you? The breathing?" Anyway, fear not, Anon. The noise only has as much power over you as you let it. If it ever comes back, tell it to fuck off and wash your hands off it, you'll be fine.
Has anyone here seen gnomes or small creatures peeking around corners or doors in the middle of the night as kids? When I was 6 or 7, while trying to sleep, I saw what appeared to be 2 small creatures wearing cone hats, no bigger than a shoe, peeking from my bedroom dormitory and then trying to come in, only to get scared and run. Because of the dark, I could not get other features, only that they seemed humanoid, maybe green skin and simple clothes.
I grew up in rural Ireland nearby a lot of small forests and used to see and hear gnome, imp, like creatures out of the corner of my eye and peeking from behind trees. I could hear them conversing in an old form of Irish Gaelic. I told my grandparents about them, and they said they're leprechauns, and they mean no harm. Sometimes I go out to the forests in the early morning and can still hear and see them, especially if I softly call out to them in Irish. My grandparents said they're more willing to appear in front of children and that children are more sensitive to their presence, which fades the older you get. But I can still hear and see them to an extent.
I have a few first. B7, playing alone in my room, dragged my mattress onto the floor and was jumping around on it. Suddenly I jump and don't come down. Instead I drift up toward the ceiling. I instinctively knew how to move. Feels completely natural. Float up to the light pendant and look inside at all the dead bugs and at the light bulb. Never seen the inside of one before. I float over to look at the top of the wardrobe. Lots of things I'm too short to normally see. After a few minutes, I gradually drift back down to the mattress and keep playing second. About 10 this time. Woke up abruptly. A while before my alarm on a school day, sit up in bed. Everything seems normal. Then I realize there's a hand right next to me. First instinct is it's my hand, but my arm is asleep or something. Or some kind of foreign limb syndrome, xenomelia. But no, my hands are right here. That's not my hand. In fact, the hand is totally severed a few inches above the wrist. But no blood or anything. Panic and throw the blankets plus hand on the floor and run out of the room. I heard it thump against the floor where it fell. Parents have already left for work, and anyway, I must be imagining things, right? So I just went to school as normal. When I got home, there was nothing unusual in the blankets. Third, probably 12 or 13, hanging with a friend Cora during lunchtime at school. Walking around outside, other kids talk to me, but not to her. After a few rounds of this, it starts getting weird, and we start joking she's invisible. Then other friends come around looking for Cora and asking me where she went. MITZU, she's right there. Assume it's a prank, but it's funny, so we play along. Then back to classes. Teachers can't see her either. They call the school nurse and security. She's still right there in class. They just can't see or hear her. We're both freaked out, but trying to act normal. Ride the bus home. Next day, everyone asks her where she was.
I feel like you are making this up. How did Cora explain? When did she reappear?
She never knew when exactly she disappeared and reappeared, since from our perspective there was no change in the first place.
But she was back by the time her dad got home late that night, and there wasn't anyone else in their household to notice her missing. As for how she explained the disappearance, she just told everyone she ditched school. This was back in the late 90s, so it was easy for kids to drop off the radar for a few hours.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.